But I don't hear you. I'm not muted, am I?
You are not muted. Perfectly fine. So keep as it is. Everything is perfect. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. A warm welcome to the third PC Bunsal Memorial Lecture. And we have, unfortunately, for given situations, move to a online platform rather than having it physically as we did in the last couple of times. I would now formally request Professor Anjali Multani, head of the department at Humanities and Social Sciences, to formally open the program and welcome all the dignitaries.
Thanks very much, Shishir, and thank you, Saurabh and Ankush and all the ECO colleagues for organizing this. So my job is to essentially introduce the department, which I'm happy to do. We are a multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary department, Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at IIT Delhi. We comprise 6 classic disciplinary groups and other interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary research clusters. In the last decade, we have grown enormously, not only in terms of faculty hires and student registrations, but also in reputation and programs. Currently, apart from our UG teaching and PhD programs, we have 2 MSc programs, one in cognitive science and one, of course, in economics. The department has been witnessing an exponential increase in the number of student applications for all our programs every year, and we are hoping to grow and diversify more as we attract the best talent in faculty and students from all over. One of the unique strengths of our department, especially compared to other social science and humanities departments in the capital, is our location within IIT, as well as the fact that we attract researchers and thinkers who are naturally drawn to more interdisciplinary work and extreme frontiers of research. We have been very fortunate in the support we have received from alumni. Both undergrad students who have taken our courses as electives, our own PhD students, and of course the institute itself. Our faculty's outreach and impact on public policy is achieved not only through teaching, but also through the active work and publishing we do in our professional associations, through academic journals, newspapers, service on state and central government commissions and boards, and other policy committees, as well as through the UPSC and UGC exam boards. We are especially proud of our new programs and are happy to see their vibrant activity through talks, lectures, and colloquiums. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to the third Dr. PC Bunsal Memorial Lecture. This lecture is going to be delivered by Professor Ashok Kotwal from the Vancouver School of Economics on an extremely important and almost catastrophically topical subject, which is the causes and implications of unequal growth, with a focus, of course, on India. Since I am from the literature discipline, I would have to quote, Shakespeare here, who is for once, I think, wrong when he said that the evil that men do lives after them while the good is interred with their bones. That is certainly not true of great thinkers and researchers like Dr. Bansil, whose family is determined to carry on that legacy by, with this very generous outreach and sponsorship of this kind of lecture series. So we would like to place on record our gratitude to the Bansal family and, of course, our deep appreciation for all the speakers who agreed to come and share their thoughts with us. I would now like to invite Professor Ganguly, who is the Deputy Director, Strategy and Planning of the Institute, to say a few words. Professor Ganguly, please.
Good morning, everybody. It's my great pleasure and honor to be here saying few words at this third PC Bunsal Memorial Lecture. Professor Rao, our director, could not join, and I got the message 20 minutes back that I have to speak a few words. But actually I was involved when it started with Arun Bansal visiting IIT Delhi, and I was discussing with Professor Ravinder Kaur, and this took off and it has taken shape. I'm very glad that we are in the third lecture of this series. IIT Delhi has a great thrust towards humanities. We want our engineers and technologists to be well-rounded personalities, and the humanities department does a great service in that. And I believe most of the humanities courses are very popular among the BTech students, who many of them, as you know, turn out to be outstanding leaders in the world, not only in the core disciplines, but in varied disciplines in civil services, in management, in as entrepreneurs, as innovators, and you see so many of our alumni in very wide range of areas, including yesterday I flagged off one of our alumni who is going to Mount Everest. So I think that tells you about the interests of IIT Delhi students, and humanities department gives that extra thing to the engineering students who are recruited by or who enter the portals of IIT Delhi. It's very important for me to say that the department has started a master's in economics, a very important area. And earlier we had courses on economics, but now we have a master's in economics. And I think this will be special because it is in an institute along with technology and management. And so there is a interdisciplinary approach to the growth of the careers of the students who take up a master's of economics at IIT Delhi. I want to personally thank our speaker today, Professor Ashok Kotwal from the Vancouver School of Economics. And I also want to thank the Bansal family for carrying on the legacy of Professor PC Bansal. With these words, I wish you all a grand success, and I wish that this lecture series continues without any fail. Pandemic or no pandemic, I think such things should continue. And unfortunately, I have another meeting scheduled at 10:30 because I was not supposed to be in this meeting. But it's a very nice to, I see Arun Bansil is there. I have interacted with him several times, and I hope he's fine and healthy. And Professor Ashok Kotwal, take care in these times and be safe. And with that, I would stop here and ask Professor Anjali to continue.
Thank you very much, Professor Ganguly. I understand the short notice, but thank you very much for your presence and for your kind words. I will now hand over to Shishir, who will conduct the rest of the opening formalities. Thank you, Shishir.
Thank you so much, Anjali. I would now request Sandeep Bansal, who is grandson of Dr. PC Bunsal, to speak a few words about PC Bunsal's legacy.
Good morning, everyone. I welcome you all to the third Dr. PC Bunsal Memorial Lecture. Addressing you all virtually is the new normal, as globally we are all clamoring towards a real life. I thank all of you present here who have been instrumental in making this memorial a reality. It is always a poignant and a nostalgic moment for me annually here, as I remember my father and my grandfather, who, along with my uncle, Professor Arun Bansal, really worked towards getting this started. And of course, thanking IIT Delhi with Saurabh, Professor Saurabh, Professor Ankush, everybody who really worked hard to get this floating now. My father, Pawan Bansal, was an alumni from IIT batch of 1967, IIT Madras. For some of us who had the opportunity to meet him in person would remember his humbling humanity, gentleness and compassion in all walks of life. So yes, standing at his alma mater and speaking about my grandfather is indeed very reassuring. Coming to Dr. PC Bansal, in whose memory we are here today, belonged to the first batch of Indian economics. Dr. PC Bunsal worked for FAO for 15 years and authored several books on agriculture economic and statistical compendium. After this retirement from FAO in 1982, he founded the Techno-Economic Research Institute, more often known as TERI, and continued his vigorous research activities. My grandfather's scholarly legacy consists of over 400 archival publications and a collection of 46 books and monographs. On a personal note, both my father and grandfather were very humble self-effacing men who never thought their simple roots and never forgot where they came from. The most important lesson that I've learned from them is what is important. In life, it's not what we came with, but where we want to go and how intensely we want to go there. We all will be mostly remembered for a kind of a life we lived and how many lives we touched and how many touched them back. So with these words, let me conclude my thanking to all present here. I hope that we all aspire for greater heights and may we as a global entity come out stronger winners against this pandemic, which has brought us all to our knees, but yet instilled a deeper faith in the resentment spirit of man that life goes no matter what. Stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. As you all know, we have Professor Ashok Kotwal here today, and he's an emeritus professor of economics at the Vancouver School of Economics, University of British Columbia. He has been associated with the university for a long time, but besides that, he has been a fellow at the Bureau of Research in Economic Analysis and Development, an associate at the Theoretical Research in Economic Development, and editor-in-chief for Ideas for India, which is a portal which disseminates development and policy issues focusing on India. And he also has an IIT connection. He completed his BTech undergraduate degree in electrical engineering from IIT Bombay and joined IBM after graduation. He pursued electrical engineering for a few more years in the US, and as a student in a developed country, the stark difference in standard of living for a similarly skilled person in India versus US made him think deeply about the possible reasons. And he switched fields later to economics to find answers to these questions and completed his PhD at the Boston University in 1982. It is difficult to summarize his vast body of research, but finding the factors behind the persistence of poverty remained a constant throughout his academic career. Around that theme, his work spans organizational structures, labor and credit markets, and the interaction between agriculture and industry. He studied the economic reforms in India and their impact on poverty extensively. His other research interests are political economy of development, formation of social capital, the efficiency of government delivery systems, and determinants of quality of education, among the recent works. We are very, very fortunate that we have him to deliver the third PC Bunsal Memorial Lecture. Today, he'll speak about the consequences and of unequal growth. Without further ado, I give you Professor Ashok Kotwal. Professor Kotwal, please take the floor.
Well, thank you very much, sister, for such a nice introduction. And I would like to thank the organizers at Delhi IIT, as well as the Bansal family to make this event occur. I have to say, I feel kind of fondly toward this audience. Although I didn't go to IIT Delhi, the memories of IIT Bombay are still there, and I feel a bit nostalgic about it. Anyway, today's topic, the causes and implications of unequal growth, I think has been discussed many, many times. I have a slightly different take on it. First of all, this comes from the joint effort of two of my colleagues, Maitreesh Ghatak at LSE and Bharat Ramaswamy at Ashoka. Maitreesh has already given a version of this paper last year. And what I'm trying to do here is to take half of that and attach to it, another set of conversations we've had together about what's happening in the United States. So there you go. Now, why United States? Because for some reason, everybody's interested in United States. And indeed, what happens there affects the whole world. So I'm going to indulge myself in kind of an issue that I've been thinking for quite some time. So first, India. Now, you should note that they're not completely different topics. They're both about the same thing, which is joblessness. The poverty in India, finally, it is shaped by the fact that a whole lot of Indian population is really trapped in agriculture. And the standard way when a very poor country tries to develop is something is blocking this very big set of population to move into formal sector and going from low productivity to high productivity tasks. Okay. So joblessness. Now, the standard way of, you will learn in the very first few lessons in development economics that how do poor countries become rich? Well, there's a standard path for the successful countries, which is that every poor country has a very large informal sector where productivity is low. That's how you define informal sector. It's agriculture is the informal sector, a lot of mama papa shops and small businesses. This is what constitutes an informal sector. And what we think as a conventional way is that people with low productivity are poor, they're trapped there, and basically, India is poor because far too many people in India are kind of trapped in this informal sector. They have to get out into the formal sector, go from low productivity to high productivity. It's not happening. And it's not happening because the modern industry, the formal industry, is not creating jobs for them and not absorbing this large population from agriculture and other low productivity activities into high productivity activities. Okay, why is that? So our my first point is just to give us short explanation as why that is so. Okay. Now, how did other countries, other Asian countries especially, solve this problem? And we kind of commonly know in the 1970s and 80s, places starting with Japan and then Southeast Asia and then lately China have followed pretty much the same path, and that is they saw they had a very large labor force which was unskilled, but they saw huge opportunities in the developed country markets. And the advantage was they were low if they could absorb technology developed elsewhere and train their labor to absorb this technology. And then they found that there was it was not so difficult to compete in the Western markets, right? And this is sort of well known. And they equipped their labor. They gave they gave them human capital, health, education. They built the infrastructure for it, and moved labor rapidly from agriculture to formal industry. That hasn't happened in India, right? And we have never been able to um, find a way to a kind of export-led growth, which every Asian country that is successful has managed to do. So why is that? Now, the time hasn't passed yet that we can still find some way for export-led growth. But we have certain handicaps. And one of them is China is already there. It's a huge country, and it has become the manufacturing hub of India. And they have occupied a lot of these spaces in Western markets, US markets. And to outcompete them, is challenging. It's difficult. That if we were at in the international markets at the same time China was, or even the Southeast Asians were, we could have done a better job. But in addition, we have a political system which is we have a federal political body, and that also means it becomes much more difficult than it was for China to kind of solve the main bottlenecks in labor laws, in land laws, and so on. Everything is a little more difficult. But then, what do we do for the countries which followed the export-led path? They have basically they don't have a demand problem or a demand constraint. They don't have to worry about, well, where am I going to export to? There should be a big aggregate demand somewhere where all we have to do is to produce quality goods, and we already have low wages. So with that, train our labor force and try, very assertively to push our exports in these markets. It is also true that nowadays globalization is in bad repute. That the politically it is so that you could not do it as easily as you could do it in 1970s. So then what happens is then you have to worry about domestic demand. Unless there is a large amount of demand somewhere where you can sell the kind of manufactured goods which which the corporation don't have to worry where is the demand going to come from, then we could be successful. But if not, we would have to certainly worry about where in India itself, where can we look for domestic demand. That doesn't mean giving up on exports. It just means also look for domestic demand. And in order to do that, we have to understand the trickle-down process better. Okay, and this is where this unequal growth comes in, because long years of unequal growth has managed to suppress the domestic demand. And let me explain what I mean. So, in fact, Marx long ago had kind of expressed this, that what happens in the world is very unequal, so that the only people who are ready to go out and buy, who present themselves as a demand, are the really high income people. If supposing we have an extreme condition that the most of the workers are at subsistence level, so they don't have power to buy anything other than what they're already getting at subsistence, then there will be a crisis. And what kind of crisis? That producers have savings that they could invest, but there are no buyers. And because buyers are too poor. And if that happens, there'll be a realization crisis. I mean, we are far from it. But it was kind of an interesting speculation. Now, first, I want to just explain how unequal India is, right? So here is the wealth share split into 10 different deciles of income. Okay? Now you see already the top decile has 77% of the wealth share. 77%, just 1/10 of the people. If you look at the bottom 10%, it has only 0.2%. The first and the second deciles have 86, 87% of the world share. So it's a very unequally divided country in terms of incomes. Now, so if we take a very brief view of growth in India, before 1991, we had, since independence, what we call license Raj. It's a heavily regulated economy where entrepreneurship was hugely stifled. And there was what people called Hindu rate of growth. There was growth, but it wasn't the kind of growth that East Asian countries or Southeast Asian countries experience. But the license Raj was liberalized in 91, and there were small steps taken from 1985 onwards. Now, it so happened though, we built IITs and IIMs, and so what it meant was that around year 2000, there was a happenstance. I guess that's what I would call it. There's a happenstance of surging global demand for software services, business services, even managers, and we had excess of them. We were building all these things without really a plan, but there was some kind of serendipity. And then we had excess of software programmers and managers and so on. At the same time, there was a big surge of demand on the global scale, right? And this is where all of a sudden our export sector took off from a very small size to big surge. Okay? Now, that was a good thing. Somehow there was a coincidence of supply and demand, and the software industry took off. But what is the anatomy of that trickle-down growth from that? So when we talk about trickle-down, I mean, this is, okay, here is a start. Now, how is this sector going to pull along the rest of the economy, right? What is the trickle-down? And by trickle down, we normally mean that, okay, one group of people, or whether they are engineers or managers, or they get a growth spurt, their incomes go up. Then the next stage is to find out what are these people who have suddenly become slightly richer, what kind of things are they spending their money on? And if we know, this is what trickle down is, that if they go out and buy cars, then it's beneficial to auto sector, right? And then they are hiring automobile workers. Then we have to worry about how the automobile workers are spending their work, raised incomes on, and so on. And that is the trickle down process. So that's what we need to do, and that's what we did do, and that's what the first sector about. So growth episode from 2003 to 11 was one of the nicest for in the growth episodes. Okay. So GDP growth, except for the financial crisis, which really came from the US and the rest of the world, except for that crisis, it was consistently close to 8% a year. Okay? And that is pretty good compared to 2-3% during the license Raj. But unfortunately, that spurt could not be sustained. And why is that? Well, one possible reason is that growth spurt was triggered by the highly skill-intensive sector. These are IIT trained, IIM trained people, and the growth of this skilled population did trickle down, but it was a very small sector as a percentage of population. And so their direct benefits were passed on to the producers of those items that they first rushed out and spent on. But then we have to see, like the trickle down growth, a certain continuity, what is the next layer spent on, and what is the next layer. So we have to really understand the spending patterns of various income groups, right? Now, so first of all, the first burst, the first wave of trickle down, really it was quite small, because the primary sector that really grew was quite small. It was a tiny percentage of the overall population. And Oxfam had recently a report which asked the 73% of all wealth generated in 2017 went to the richest 1%. 670 million Indians, who form the bottom 50% of the population, experience only 1% of increase in their wealth. Right? These are not good numbers, but you can see the trickle down in this growth episode was not very large, partly because a very small part of the population got this income jolt to start with. But at the same time, there were a lot of new industries came up. The number of billionaires increased from 9 in 2000 to 119 today, etc. 63 million Indians are driven into poverty because of healthcare. So this was a very unequal growth. That first growth in spurt was a very weak spurt, right? And there are many ways people put it. It will take 941 years to for a minimum wage worker in India to make as much as a top executive makes at a leading garment factory in a year, and so on. We can. So it has been a very unequal growth. But yeah, so first reason we could say for the slow growth, or the reason that this growth episode lasted very short time, was very much because there was very little trickle down. Okay, now let's look at in detail how people belonging to various income classes spend their money, spend their higher income, right? And here we are looking at the rise in their incomes, not their overall incomes, but just the rise, because growth is a dynamic phenomenon, and we had to see how it is carried through generations of Indians. Okay, so this is CMI data, and it sheds some light on this different classes of Indian consumers. How do they spend it? Now, this is taken from consumer pyramids data from December of 2019, which means it's a fairly recent data and reasonably reliable data. So what you see is, again, the data is organized along the deciles. There are 10 deciles, and number 10 is the highest incomes. Number 1 are the poorest. And if you look at it, okay, even for the top 10%, you can look at it per capita basis per month. So per capita expenditures per month, individual basis, the top decile, this is the richest class in India, has an average income of 7,733 per month. You know, what is the income tax level? You have to have income beyond that to pay income tax, right? Now, if you take, even if you take the lowest income holder in the top class doesn't pay income tax. He can't afford to pay income tax. It's if you look at household expenditure per month, the average household expenditure is 5,400. Okay, sorry, average household expenditure is 21,700 around. Okay. The household income per month, given that, is 45,616. Right? That's the income, out of which this household saves 52%, 52.5%. This would surprise you. It surprised me when I looked at these numbers. These are very small figures to be in the top decile. I mean, if you, you know, we always think, no matter who we are, we always think we are middle class, right? I mean, if you have a friend and he's driven in by a driver and a nice car, of course, you know your friend is well off. He has a job in the formal sector of you know, some skilled job, and he has a driver. driver brings him in, he drives in. I guarantee you that not only your friend is in the top decile, but very likely even his driver will be, right? We all think we are middle class. We are not middle class. A university faculty member is not middle class. He belongs to the top class. And yet every one of us thinks that we are middle class. It's just middle class. You know, that guy, he's not Ambani or Adani, he's middle class, just an IPL player, and that too from Mumbai, you know. So it is, we have very little idea sometimes. I mean, I didn't, until I saw these numbers, I still didn't think they were like this. So the conclusion is India is very, very poor. I mean, if you see the bottom 2 percentile, they're negative numbers. Why is that? What does that mean? What that means is saving rate minus 34%. How is that possible? How can somebody live like that? Well, the thing is, it means that they're constantly living on borrowing. They're loaned out, so on, right? In the neck, they are always loaned out. They are borrowing and then they're paying back, and then in the lifetime, they never pay back. So this is the state of Indian households, okay? So, and one thing you notice here is that the rich save a greater part of their incomes than the poor, right? That's unmistakable. And even the real middle class, like fifth or sixth decile, even they try to save some money so that they could survive in their old age and so on. Okay, so that is part of the problem, that India is so poor that their consumption is at a painfully low rate, low level, and having aggregate demand for businesses to come up and sell to, the opportunities are very low. The richer folks, they do save, and so we are not really lacking in savings, but it's a small market. It's a small market. So if we don't find aggregate demand abroad, which means export-led growth, it is difficult to go beyond, low rates. And this, in the growth theory, we always, our starting point is always people are saving, they invest, and supply creates its own demand. So when somebody invests, he starts a factory, and then people come and work there, and then their incomes go up, and when their incomes go up, they provide the demand, and then the factory is bigger to supply the needs of these workers. That's kind of the common story. But what if the incomes are not growing? Not only they are low, but they stay low. And then we do have some problem. We have extreme problem. And any CEO, he doesn't believe supply creates its own demand. He basically thinks that, it's right now market is not hot. It's not worth. I might as well buy government bonds, or if I'll see if I can find something in Singapore or Mauritius, or maybe I should, I should send my funds abroad, have a money manager, see if I can open a factory abroad. So it's a whole different calculus, and demand matters a lot to many of our savers or potential investors. And when there's a demand collapse, as it happened in the during the COVID year, certainly there was quite a few corporations who also went into serious financial trouble. Some folded. But the government had flooded the banks with liquidity. Right? The Reserve Bank had, there were a lot of help from the Reserve Bank to banks. Interest rates were held low. And yet, many corporations were holding their cash. They were just sitting on their cash, waiting for the aggregate demand to come back. And this is not just India, but even the developed countries, this happens. So demand is important, and potential investors are all looking at it, and they're looking at the economic picture. So, compared to most countries, government of India pumped much less liquidity into the economy. Now that's a lot of economists were advocating that they should, even some of the conservative economists. And the reason was that they said, well, yeah, under normal circumstances, this is considered to be extravagant and so on. But under the present circumstances, when the demand has collapsed, spending a lot of government help to those who are heavily affected deserve this, because rather than just looking at charity and government deficits and the standard macro conventional wisdom, if you don't do this, many companies will go down, that they could not keep up with their normal expenditure. And once they go into bankruptcy, it's very difficult to recover. So this is kind of, you can see the dilemma and how difficult it gets. Another thing is that here we are looking at, first of all, another table. Now here is a detailed breakdown on what people spend their money on. Okay? So the good thing to look at is the last two columns, where you have urban top 20%, and in contrast, rural bottom 20%. And these numbers are what we call expenditure elasticities. Okay? For example, take the first line, all food, right? To aggregate all food. And what that number means is if you apply 1%, just 1 rupee in your total expenditure. Expenditure is taken because it's easier to measure than income. People never divulge their incomes. and we don't have, especially they don't pay income tax. We don't have easy record. So what this means, if you give 1 rupee to the total 1%, if you increase the total expenditure by 1%, then the expenditure on all food will go up by 0.46. Okay? Or take a number we can see, right? That there's an interesting one, right? Like some of the thing. I'm trying to differentiate the expenditure patterns by the poor from those of the rich. Take milk and milk products. Yeah, the higher incomes, urban top 20%, the first 2 deciles, right? Then this number is 0.51, okay? For the urban poor, urban bottom half is 1.20, which means member of this group, the poorer group, would spend a lot more of his percentage income on milk and dairy products. Okay. Interestingly, meat, fish, and eggs, the rural numbers are much larger than urban numbers. I was very puzzled by this, but it seems that is because lot of rich people are vegetarians, it seems. That was the explanation I heard. But what these numbers allow us to do, it tells us that in many, many aspects, right, the vegetarian food items, even processed food, intoxicants, 1.48 to 1.72, clothing, accessory, many of these labor-intensively produced goods, the rural demand is higher than the urban demand. Especially the rural poor demand is higher than the urban rich demand, right? And this immediately tells you something about the unequal growth. That in fact, when the growth is not inclusive, that when it's not accruing to the rural or even poorer classes, then there is very little addition to the aggregate demand when very little of it goes to the rural consumers or poorer consumers. So unequal growth means the total aggregate demand for various things grows much more slowly. The poor actually tend to spend, if they have money in their hands, more on labor-intensive goods and more of these simple goods which are labor-intensive. So if the money is in their hand, they will spend it more on the kind of things which doesn't require a lot of capital, which is not sophisticated, and which actually boost the economy faster, because they would spend on these things because they have been kept away from what they think their consumer needs are. Right? So why is the aggregate? Why? Okay, it's not exports. Why hasn't the aggregate demand grown faster? And one reason is that it is because the unequal growth kept less money going into the hands of the poorer sections, and a lot of it was given to the urban and richer sections. So unequal growth also makes sure that in the next period, much much less increase in aggregate demand would occur, right, due to unequal growth. If the money instead goes to the rich, you can imagine what happens. A large chunk of it they save, and a lot of it goes to um, highly, much less labor-intensive things, right? To go to formal sector, but much less to the labor-intensive sectors. So this is the reason, unequal growth causes unequal growth. Basically, the poverty begets itself. That then you just responding to the demands made by the richer folks, and those demands are less labor intensive. So this continuity, so unequal growth proceeds that way, and growth remains more and more unequal. So that is the first half, okay, which talks about why India remains poor. Part 2 is about United States, okay, where also there is unequal growth. Their poorer people are much richer than our poorer people, and sometimes our richer people. But here the issues that are under discussion, the issues that concern a lot of people are slightly different. First of all, US is just as unequal as India. Maybe the inequality is slightly less. And sources of unequal growth are, some same, some slightly different. But they exist. And you can see what the sources of unequal growth there. So one of the first things that is much discussed is labor displacing technology. And this talk being at IIT, I thought I should bring it up. Two aspects of it. One is just the kind of damage that is done by unequal growth, what its sources are. And secondly, talk a little bit more about labor displacing technology, because I have some questions for you. You are IIT, and obviously it was mentioned earlier by your director that you have worked at in a very, very advanced topics, computer science and so on. So I have some questions which I'm puzzled about. Okay? And at the last, afterwards, I'll ask you these questions. Not as a puzzle, but because I don't know the answer. Okay, so what causes unequal growth? Labor displacing technology is one thing. We often call it skill bias technology, which means that you need a PhD in computer science to sit with a complicated machine and to carry out some machine learning to solve a problem. But it's also the age-old way of creating an inequality, which is inheritance, right? That somebody will become very successful and then has huge inheritance. The children are born with a silver spoon in their mouth, and then they have capital. Capital can always grow, even if you just put it in the bank. And there are a few cases where the parents would see the children waste the inheritance, but in most cases, they keep progressing across generations. So inheritance. Assortative mating. Now, these are not necessarily extremely wealthy people, but what assortative mating means is like, the IIT student marries an IIT student, and IIT students get good jobs. So both husband and wife have well-paying jobs, and it is natural for this to happen because you're spending your youthful years with somebody who has the potential to get higher salaries. That's sort of mating. I mean, several of my colleagues, those faculty members, spending a lot of their time doing joint research, etc., in their own faculty rooms. So assortative mating is inevitable. And so two families are earning high incomes will lead to that. As far as blue-collar workers are concerned, there has been a decline in union membership from 1980 onwards, right? It is from almost 17% to 6.5% in 2017. Then, there is the technology of performance change, right? So the superstars. So, in the old days, you had, you went to a local club or to listen to a local singer. And there will be maybe 7 people, 8 people, 10 people. The singer's income was quite limited. But now somebody cuts an album, and that can be listened to by a few million people, right? And so there's this superstar can make a lot of money by technology that can make his singing and his entertainment value many, many times than the local singer, right? And also, when you're richer, you have a greater political influence. And so rich people certainly try to shape the government policy, right? Low taxes on high incomes, etc. And so there are several sources of this unequal growth. I have some interest in kind of looking at or analyzing this one factor that many blame for the unequal growth, and that is the technology. Okay. So I would like to discuss the causes and the implications. Now, there are two things that I'm going to bring up. One is basically some of the issues that have shaken the modern world in the Western countries. I can kind of take the line that they're all caused by unequal growth, okay? Although they don't seem related to the outcomes. And the second thing is that, which is mentioned over and over again, that what the future world is going to be. Is it going to be jobless for humans? If the machines can do these wonderful things, especially with artificial intelligence, you can solve problems that humans simply find very hard or impossible to solve. Well, is there anything that's left for humans that machines cannot tackle? And if so, will machines take over? And I mean, this is not just science fiction. It is of the serious interest. I mean, in the province in Canada where I live, British Columbia, had recently appointed a commission and to find out if that is going to be our future world. And if that is so, if all jobs disappear because machines can do everything, then okay, we don't have jobs. what are the various other aspects jobs touch? How will we have income? Only machines will have incomes, which means the machine owners will have income. Like we talk about capital share, labor share. Maybe labor share of national income is zero. It's all capital, which means the guy who owns the capital. Is that so? And one of my colleagues at the UBC was appointed the chair of this commission. And we often had these kind of conversations in faculty rooms. Is this going to happen? I mean, some thought this was a very dystopian idea. It's negative utopia. And some people thought, no, this is great. You know, we can just learn guitar or do whatever we wanted to, whatever we always dreamed of doing, instead of going every day into a classroom and teach macroeconomics. So at the end, I'll ask you your verdict, because the commission has completed the report and they have come up with certain evidence. And then I want to ask you, are we heading toward the end of work? Okay. This graph here, this is from Piketty's book. This graph is the curve is what you have in the vertical axis is the share of the top 1%. Okay, that's it. It tells you all you want to know about inequality in terms of how much. So you start at 1910 and then you go up to 2010. So 1910 through the end of the war, like 1945 or so. Then before that, there was obviously a lot of inequality, right? But so inequality was high, right? So you can really look at this vertical axis as the amount of inequality, because to the extent the top 1% has a higher share of total income, it's greatly unequal. And before the Second War, it was indeed greatly unequal. Then after war, it comes down. And it comes down, and then there is this, it holds flat all the way up to 1980. Okay? So this period of 1945 through 1980 is the flat region. Does it mean a good or bad region? It means it's more equal region, which means it's a good region for most people, right? So that flat area is really the golden era of American economy. Okay? It's flat, it's not, I mean, the poor were very happy. And what was happening then was really the American society was getting transformed. People came back from the war. They had this GI Bill where people returning from the battlefront were given loans to go to colleges, technical colleges. The education costs were really pushed to zero. And there was a resurgence, a new spirit, which put people to work. After the laws passed in New Deal, government spent tremendous amount of money to build infrastructure, national infrastructure, right? And this continued for like, so for the 40 through 70 and almost 80, like 40 years, was the golden era of American economy. And also, I use the word transformative. Why? Because the way of life change, like whole bunch of, automobiles poured in, the highways were built, the conveyance became easier, new gadgets came up, kitchen gadgets, washer, dryer, dishwasher, and many other things which made life much easier. The things that women slogged for hours and hours now could be done by these gadgets, and then they could go back to work. One family incomes now stretched to two family incomes. Women went out to work. It has its costs, especially to men, but women felt liberated. They went and worked while if they wanted to, and to some extent from American population, women could do what they wanted to do a little bit. They felt liberated, and now, some people find out that we'll argue that, they were, some women just wanted to stay home. That's fine, but that was their choice, and they had more income than before. But this was the golden period. Okay? And after 1980, then the incomes, now we are in invariably double income households, right? But at the same time, despite it becoming two family members working, the inequality grew tremendously. Okay, because you see that curve rising up. Why? It means now we have the top 1% is getting more and more share of their income. Okay, so as progress continued, the inequality grew. Now, why is that? Plus, Solo had once commented that we see productivity growth everywhere. We have iPhones and different versions of iPhones, and cars get fancier, and what are poor spending, what are rich spending in the modern era, in our recent era. Well, there are a lot of kind of things being produced, but they are not as transformative as what happened after the war in 50s and 60s. That was basically the kind of gadgets or utensils or things that made that we found useful. It made life more convenient. Okay. Now, okay, we have a lot of new conveniences. Smartphones, good thing. I mean, given the amount of time I spend on it, it must be a good thing. But it must have been a difference when you go from, say, drainage and a toilet at home as opposed to an outhouse. In fact, I asked my class one day, okay, how do you compare the new versus the old developments, right? Who would give up something for this Facebook? Who would give up Facebook? What would you give up? That's the way I asked the question. What would you give up for a Facebook? Like if you say Facebook is going to be banned unless you give me something. What is that? And I was amazed that I never actually would have imagined, but almost the whole class, they were not willing to give up anything for Facebook. And now Facebook is, of course, obsolete. Now you have newer and newer things. And in fact, one guy went so far that he would give up having a toilet at home. He doesn't mind an outhouse if the price was a Facebook. So, it's Robert Gordon has written a big fat book about it, that comparing the transformative value of some of the gadgets versus some of these new conveniences or entertainment pieces that we are presented. And he's wondered why that is so. What is the value it brings us? Anyway, but people have different tastes, so that's fine. Okay, I have gone already over time, I realize. Okay, this is another graph showing you the inequality. I should just rush and tell you. So unequal growth, and let me just come to my question, okay? Okay, all this history you probably know. But let me ask you this. That the dynamic process, machines make it possible for a few workers, and can this continue? Can workers get absorbed in these new activities? So for a long time, this kind of topic has been discussed, where reforming education and skilling the low skilled workers would solve the problem, which means there's a race between education and robots or computers. So can you stop going to the end point, which is the end of work? Well, if you train people fast enough, they would never have to go without a job. That was the idea. Okay. Now, yeah, I was going to talk about Leontief and player piano, but I'm sorry, I just missed looking at the clock. Okay, so let me just directly take you to the Commission's report. Okay, so here, instead of the US here, we're just going to Canada and our province and quickly show you this thing. So this is the employment rate for 10 years. And this is men's and women's employment rate, that how many of them are still employed. Okay. This proportion of women, different kinds of work, cognitive, manual, and routine. And what you see here is there's not a drastic increase in the cognitive. This trend has pretty much been the same. Right? There's not a real difference between this. Again, in the future, there's no trend. I mean, this last point is 2021. So we don't see any evidence that of a trend toward all the work being done by automatons. So what would be your verdict if you looked at this audience, at this data? Is enough work ever going to happen, or human beings have constructed the kind of answer to this dystopian vision, that they have trained enough people in the right way so that you don't need a robot, so that it's not profitable to need a robot or artificial intelligence, etc. So I'm sorry, but I better stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kotwal, for that very engaging talk on the evidence on inequality in India and its possible consequences, especially on the demand side, where we see that export-led demand has dropped, and the inequality in income can also have threats for internal demands as well. So I will now open the floor for questions from the audience. Those who are here in person, they can raise their hand and ask question directly. But if you are attending online, you can you please type your questions, if any, in the chat box with your name so that we can pick and choose. So I guess I already have one question. We will start with that. In the meantime, we will wait for more questions either in the chat box or from audience live from here. So Professor Kotwal, Adrijit Basu asks, why cannot we combine industry and agriculture and promote agro-based industries, whether that would solve the conundrum?
Yes, can I just, does the audience hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Yes, that has been a solution for a long time. But certain things are holding it at bay. I mean, it's certainly a good idea, but now notice, take an example, right? Supposing you have apples growing in Himachal Pradesh, and maybe you can make apple jam or apple juice, and that will add value to the fruit itself. So at all these things which can be agro-processed, first thing you need is you can't do it instantly. If you don't have a cold storage, they will rot. So in order to do that, you need cold storages and you need a processor. Okay, the processor can't just use a fruit just picked. So you need an aggregator. You need somebody who will take the agency of basically gathering apples from all sorts of apple farmers and put it in cold storage so that processor can then pick it from one particular go down, and the processor, or there may be intermediaries who took the fruit from the cold storage into this. So it's a long link, right? And unless the trucks of the intermediaries who take the fruit and take it to the processing unit, there's a pretty long link, and all those links have to work out. There must be roads which are good enough for trucks to carry all this, right? And even if they go to the main centers, they need to be able to negotiate small roads in the villages to go and pick up the food. So then there are, this the financiers that who who basically financed the small operations, taking it from here to there, despite bad roads. And here government has to come in and build the infrastructure for it. So all these things haven't happened. They haven't happened. Now, you know, why is it that it hasn't happened? Is it the state government jobs, or are they lacking small business credit and so on? I don't really know, but it could happen, but hasn't happened. In very few states it has happened. Like 1 week successful product was the Amul dairy, right? And just one person and one unit took it upon themselves to help with all these different things. For example, aggregating all the people who own buffaloes and bringing them together and setting up a dairy. And now it's a Herculean task, and nobody except for Samul Group has done it yet.
I guess there is another question, interestingly, from Amlan Das Gupta. His question is, he finds it interesting that the war was actually followed by a fall in the share of the top 1%. And what sort of crisis leads to this sort of a change, or is this completely random? And second question is that the recent inventions like Facebook.
Sorry, but fall from what?
In the Piketty's graph that you showed, right after the war, there was a sharp decline. So was that completely random, or were there something going behind the scene?
I mean, I imagine, right, that things don't happen instantly. You know, for even the New Deal works hadn't been completed, in some cases not even started. So all those projects were, not yet done, and then the engine hadn't started whirring again, right? Like it was basically you have to go to work, your incomes have to go up, you have to start spending, and all that takes that much time, right? Like, I mean, the Hiroshima was what, 45, right? Hello?
There is another question from B. Bhattacharya, and he asks whether construction, which is one of the most important contributors in terms of employing unskilled laborers, whether mechanization of construction solve or aggravate the problem that you refer to in terms of inequality.
Oh, the construction does take a lot of manpower, right? Like right now, Biden's projects, I mean, they're very much concentrated on construction, building infrastructure. That employ, it's not, first of all, mechanization doesn't replace a construction worker all that easily, right? And you saw that in that last few slides where I show what is happening in Canada, that this idea of no work never happened. And partly, the mines are still alive, construction work is still alive. There are lots of jobs which the industry hasn't found profitable to remove workers and put their robots in doing it. I mean, if you see the way these buildings are being built and all, it's pretty hard to, I mean, I don't know what the physical limits are for the machines to triumph over people. But it's not easy. There are certain routine jobs which can be done, but it's not that easy.
Professor Arun Bansal is writing, when does the UBC report predict the machines will machines to take over completely?
Well, between the thing is, the debate still goes on, but they are kind of coming to opinion that, and these are people who were convinced when they started their work, but now they feel that no, we are always going to beat the machine. And why? Because we design the machines, we design systems that will not only take care of the problems, but how it will affect the social environment and build the machines accordingly. And this is what is happening here. So anticipating what kind of what kind of institutional arrangements will keep the human beings keep winning against the machines. And so, I was really convinced before this report that, and even David Green, who chaired this, but finally he says he doesn't see any evidence that if you're going to make a change as big as this, you will see some trends on the way, right, en route, that, okay, it is happening in this sector now. But, there are very interesting experiments going on in the universities. And then you hear of sort of, miraculous thing that this computer at Stanford did or so on. But in practice, that particular thing has to be done, has to be profitable, and then the firm has to kind of face this. I'm actually quite surprised that this happened, but it is happening. So far, it is happening.
Okay, so we have, sorry to interrupt. We have one question here from the room itself. Please identify yourself and then ask you.
Hi, my name is Shivani. Thank you for the talk, sir. My question is that in your presentation, you mentioned that the low skill need to probably approach towards a more educated level, and maybe that can solve a problem. But in India, we see this rush for education degrees, but then at the same time, we are also seeing the educated unemployed are actually increasing. So maybe we need to change our approach. I mean, I would like your comment on that.
No, but are you talking about this labor displacing machines?
Yes, Professor.
I mean, if developed countries like America and Canada are far from it, we certainly don't have to worry about it. I mean, if countries don't find it profitable to do this with skilled manpower, I don't think. I think we need to worry more about educating and equipping and giving better nutrition and just the more human capital to our workers. We are far from the frontier. One thing that does happen is sometimes when you don't have enough skilled people, you resort to more robot-oriented factory culture. And then you can't blame the producer. It's basically, right now, I think in many cases, many manufacturing units are allowed, or opted to use some automation, and I can see why, right? It's not just that it saves labor, but it gives you a better and faster product.
Okay, so we are running short of time, but maybe two more questions that we can accommodate, and I'll take them from the chat. So Anurag Panda is asking that you describe the post-war period in the US with equal growth as the golden period. However, popular perception in India is that post-1991 reform period with unequal growth is a golden period as well. Would you agree with this statement? If so, what is your thinking on why unequal growth finds public support?
Yeah, 2003 to 2011 was our golden period. Yes. I mean, growth was like 8% except for the financial crisis. And even in financial crisis, India was one of the worst sufferers. In the sense, one of the better economic performance did not fall, did not crash like many countries.
But I guess the question was, would you agree that the unequal growth, the post-1991 unequal growth is the golden period in India as well? And why unequal growth finds public
Yeah,
support?
that is the best period. The best period doesn't mean the growth wasn't unequal. I mean, it was it has always been unequal, but wages went up. The agriculture wages, that would be our measure, right? Agriculture wages went up, toward the end of that period, 2011 and so on. I mean, why that happened again, it's difficult to say because partly it happened because the terms of trade turned in favor of agriculture world over, and the minimum support prices went up during that period, and it pulled up the agriculture wages. And when the agriculture wages go up, that's the uh, best bump you can give to poverty. Poverty fell down 2011.
Okay, Shukanta Bhattacharya asks that you mentioned two problems. The first one is the demand deficiency from unequal growth, and the second is coming from robots replacing people in most of the jobs. I don't see logically why solving the first, which may be through redistribution mechanism, would solve the second one.
Oh, I didn't tell you what would solve the second one. They're separate issues, right? Like, because I was never talking about robots when I was talking about India. I was just talking about US when I was talking about robots. But
Okay. Sorry to interrupt again. I guess we are at the end of the Q&A session, and glad to know that robots have not taken India over yet. So
that's certainly not the message. I didn't want to say anything about robots as far as Indian economy is concerned.
thank you so much for clarifying those questions. Would love to continue more, but time is a binding constraint here. We
Shall
are at the
we stay for a minute after the talk?
Sure.
After this?
So to conclude the event and to say a few words as a vote of thanks, I would like to invite Professor Arun Bansil, who is also joining online. He's a university distinguished professor in physics at Northeastern University. He has a prolific academic career. He served over 2 years at the US Department of Energy, managing the flagship theoretical condensed matter physics program. He has served as an academic editor for various journals, has co-authored numerous technical articles and conference proceedings. So I invite him to say the vote of thanks and conclude the event. Professor Bansil, I think we need to switch on the microphone for you. Please stay tuned.
Let's see. Can I be heard now?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to say the vote of thanks. I feel honored. I greatly enjoyed this lecture from Professor Kotwal. This is not the type of things I worry about every day in my professional life, but I find all this so fascinating. I must say that I am perhaps more of an optimist. Maybe that's not a good thing, but that is so.
No, that is a good thing.
And I am of the opinion that I don't think machines as we know them will take over anytime soon. This vision of a future is far too rich to be taken over by machines, I think.
Yeah, that's what
there are galaxies to explore, so to say. There will always be things to do that machines will likely never be able to do. But look, I don't know the future any better than anybody else. And as I said, that I'm perhaps an optimist by nature, which may be a bad thing in this connection. But anyways, what do I know about economics? So thank you, really. The Bansil family is very grateful to IIT Delhi and to the Humanities Department for organizing this lecture and conference series as a legacy of my father's considerable contributions to agricultural economics and related fields. I used to enjoy my conversations with him whenever I talked with him, with my father. And I must say that this is a highly developed field at this point. And even though everybody can have an opinion, it's difficult to have the insights without knowing more. Let me also take this opportunity to thank the many wonderful people who have graced this lecture and contributed to its success. First of all, of course, our distinguished speaker, as I said already, Professor Kotwal, who is an emeritus professor at the University of British Columbia. It is very kind of him to deliver this exciting lecture, even though I know it's a bit of an odd hour for him in Vancouver, but his taking time to make this presentation is very much appreciated. We are also grateful to many dignitaries who have attended this lecture, again, taking time from their busy schedules. Professor Rao, the director of IIT Delhi, has graced all the previous lectures in this series, although my understanding is that he couldn't join today due to some last-minute business. Let me thank Professor Ashok Ganguly, Professor T.C. Kantpal, current deputy directors at IIT, and Professor Bala Krishnan, the previous deputy director. Professor Ganguly was, in fact, as he noted himself in his remarks earlier, the first person at IIT Delhi I contacted a few years ago to explore the possibility of holding this lecture and conference series in the memory of my father. So really special thanks go to him for getting the ball rolling. A special thanks also go to Professor Ravindra Kaur, who was the head of the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences a few years ago. And on his watch, this conference series started. We have had many wonderful discussions with her, which are all appreciated very, very much, of course. The support for the series has been continued vigorously by Professor Purnima Singh, the previous head of the Humanities Department, as well as Professor Anjali Multani, who is the current head. I had the opportunity to meet Professor Purnima Singh last year, and I hope that I will have an opportunity to see Professor Multani at some point also in person as the COVID situation improves. Certainly there's optimism, but you never know with these variants and so on. A person who is not with us today is my elder brother, Pavan Bansil, who passed away last year. This conference and lecture series is really the result of his energy and vision. I am just very gratified that I could play some small role in helping him make these events a reality here at IIT Delhi. His son Sandeep Bansil, who spoke briefly earlier today, has been responsible for all the help needed from the family to help organize these series. Events like this are made possible, of course, by the work of many students, staff, and others who work behind the scenes. So they all certainly deserve our great thanks. I would especially like to call out staff members, Mr. Vishav Mohan Goyal and Ms. Akriti Pandey of the Humanities Department, who managed many day-to-day organizational tasks in connection with this lecture. So finally, I would like to call out two people who are most responsible for making this and other events in this series possible, and they are Ankush Agarwal and Saurabh Paul. I cannot thank them enough for the genuine energy and time they have devoted to making these events a success. So let me conclude by thanking all of you again, and I hope very much that we will see many of you again at the lecture next year. So thank you again, and good day, I guess, for you. It's good night for me, but good day for you. So thank you again.
Thank you so much, Professor Arun Bansal. I guess this formally concludes the event. I guess thank you so much, all of you. I wouldn't individually name everybody because Professor Bansal has done that already. But we have almost come to the end.
Can I
Yes.
just say one thing to Dr. Bansil?
Yes.
See, I didn't understand why you think it's a bad thing to be an optimist. In fact, you hit it on the nail, right? Because finally the report, after doing research and this and that, they came up with your opinion that the man has already beaten the machine, and it will always be so.
We hope so. We hope so. Future is very difficult to predict, as you know. It's in the nature of things. But it's better to be an optimist. If nothing else, at least it feels better. So,
Okay. Thank
All
you,
right.
sir.
So we would conclude the event with another hope that next year we would meet in person rather than in this new normal. Thank you so much, everybody.
thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.